Hello, everybody, and welcome to the True Hope Cast podcast, where we take a deep dive into mental health's many physiological and psychological aspects. This is the show for you if you're looking for motivation, inspiration, knowledge, and solutions, and that's what we are all about here at True Hope Canada. And True Hope Canada is a mind and body based supplement company dedicated first and foremost to promoting brain and body health through non-invasive nutritional means. For more information about us, you can visit truehopecanada.com. Today, I welcome Michelle Reittinger to the podcast. Now, Michelle has been on the podcast before, but she was diagnosed with bipolar in 1998. She spent the next 12 years on a roller coaster of manic and depressive episodes with therapists, doctors, psychotropic medications, hospitalizations, and suicide attempts. Finally, she found a therapist that would try an unconventional approach, and through EMPower Plus and Truehope, she was able to completely turn her life around. Now, Michelle helps support people with bipolar disorder to learn to live a healthy, balanced, and productive life. Today on this podcast, we're going to be talking about her brand new, amazing book, The Upside of Bipolar: 7 Steps to Heal Your Disorder. Enjoy the show. Okay, Michelle, hi, welcome back to True Hope Cast. How are you? What is going well?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm so excited to have this conversation today. I've really been looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. It's going to be. We were just talking off air about how this is going to be such a informative, inspirational conversation around your work around EMPower Plus and around bipolar disorder. So you've been on the show before, back on episode 116. I'm pretty sure we were talking about your recovery with True Hope with your disorder of bipolar. So I'm going to leave a link in the description for anyone who wants to jump into that to get a little bit more in depth. But we're going to be talking more specifically today about your brand new book that's available, The Upside of Bipolar: 7 Steps to Heal Your Disorder. We're actually going to be doing a very special giveaway for that book, for a bottle of EMPower Plus and a bottle of free Minos. You'll get more details about that at the end of the show. But for those individuals that didn't watch that first episode or don't know who you are, would you mind just giving a little bit of an introduction about who you are and what it is that you do?
Certainly. I was diagnosed with bipolar back in 1998, 1 month before graduating from college. And when I was diagnosed initially, I was told that bipolar was a chemical imbalance, that I would have it for the rest of my life, that if I would work with the doctors, they'd help me find the right medications to help manage my disorder. And I took my doctors at their word. I had no reason to disbelieve what they were telling me. And for the next decade, I actively went to every psychiatric appointment I took every medication I was given. At one point, I was on 7 different medications, and I just kept getting worse. Some medications gave me a little bit of relief, but the symptoms were never gone. And my life was deteriorating really rapidly. And I had a massive breakdown in 1998 or 2008, 10 years after my initial diagnosis, where I was hospitalized in 3 different hospitals and across 2 states. They did electroconvulsive therapy on me. I had my first full psychotic episode, which changed my diagnosis from bipolar 2 to bipolar 1. And I made multiple attempts on my life. And I genuinely believed at that point that everybody would be better off if I were gone. I had 3 children, young children, and I believed that they'd be better off if they had a different mom. I thought my husband deserved a better wife. I just felt hopeless. I didn't feel like there was any hope for ever having any kind of quality of life anymore at that point. And I had an experience one day that I outline in the book that changed things for me. I was watching my children play, and I had this really clear realization that if I ever successfully ended my life, that it would ruin my little girl's life particularly. She was 4, and she would believe it was her fault. And from that point on, I fully committed myself to surviving. I knew, even though I didn't believe my life had value, I knew hers did. And I wanted to live for her. And even if all I could do was suffer through my life, I would do it so that she would have a chance at life. And about a year after that was when I first discovered True Hope. And the first year after that commitment that I made, I was hanging on by my fingernails. I ended up hospitalized one more time. It was just like trying to survive every day. It was exhausting. And then a friend of mine told me about True Hope. And my doctor at that point had been treating me for over 8 years. And he was as desperate to find something to help me as I was. And so when I brought this information to him, he considered it. He looked at it and told me that we had nothing to lose. Nothing else was working. And so he was willing to give me the go ahead to try it. And When I first started, transitioning from medication to micronutrients, I didn't understand really what I was doing. I thought I was trading two things that were the same. Um, because I still believed what I'd been told about like uh, bipolar being incurable, bipolar being, like diabetes and medication like insulin. And so I kind of thought that the medication wasn't working, so let's try the micronutrients is what I was thinking. But over the following 6 months or so, as my brain began to heal and as I finally came out of the fog of the medication, I remember one day waking up feeling like it was the first time I was fully awake in over a decade. And from that point on, I gradually over the next decade found additional tools and resources that helped me to uncover, the things that were actually driving the symptoms. And I eventually got to the point of full healing. Like I completely recovered from all the bipolar symptoms. And I wanted to share what I had learned with other people. And so I started my blog, I started a podcast. But as I was doing those things, I started doing more and more research and realized that it was actually possible to heal. Like I thought maybe mine was a fluke. I thought maybe I had, a lot of people will say you must have been misdiagnosed. And I thought maybe I was misdiagnosed. But as I did more research and started uncovering all of the research underpinning each of the tools and resources I had used to recover, I realized that it's not a fluke. What I experienced was not a fluke. It wasn't, a misdiagnosis. This was scientifically based. It was an integrated method for healing. And the first step of it was getting the medication out of my system, getting it out of my mind so that my brain had a chance to heal. And True Hope was the pivot point for me on that.
Wow. Well, it's quite the story, and I've heard it before, and it's still just like quite remarkable. There's a bunch of places I want to go, but I just want to start in regards to that mentality switch that you had, that commitment that you had when you were with your kids, and you were thinking about what it would be like for them to not have their mother around, and that was ended up being a motivation. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah.
That as a mentality change, because I mean, this is a very, let's say, extreme example of really needing a motivator to get you through something significant.
Yeah.
And I feel like that helps a lot of people. Finding that helps a lot of people if they wanted to make a change, whether they wanted to like lose weight or exercise more or eat better food. Like they have to find something outside of them that's going to get them through those moments where they absolutely want to, take a dip in their program. So can you tell us a little bit more about that, like that kind of that moment and that mentality change, and like what that got you through that next year that actually found you in that position to, learn about True Hope and take that path?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you have to start with the despair that led to the belief that it would be better off if I was gone. One of the challenges that we have with these diagnoses, I don't really like the diagnosis of bipolar anymore. I think that we're doing people a huge disservice by giving them a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, ADHD, major depressive disorder, because all we're doing is identifying a cluster of symptoms. And by telling them you have a disorder, quote unquote disorder, you believe you've been given an explanation. You believe that an explanation, an underlying issue has been identified. And if you are told that you're going to have this for the rest of your life, if you believe that this is the way your life is, it is a very despairing way to exist.
Yeah.
And there's no hope in it. If as I got worse and worse and worse, after each of my children were born, I deteriorated more rapidly each time. And so after my youngest at the time, I had another child afterwards, but my boy at the time was 2 years old. And after he was born, I could not recover. I was so severely depressed, I couldn't function. And the suicidal thoughts started with nightmares. I would have dreams about dying every single night. They were very vivid, very realistic dreams. And I would wake up feeling the anxiety of that dream. But over time, I started finding relief in the idea. It started to feel like a relief to think, oh, I don't have to do this anymore. Because every day waking up, not knowing what kind of day you're going to have, not knowing, am I going to be the fun mom today, or am I going to be the depressed mom? Am I going to be the mom that loses control with her children? and feeling exhausted every day by the idea of just continuing to try every day. I started finding relief in the idea of not being here anymore, not having to do it anymore. And the same thing with my kids. Like, I was seeing the damage that I was doing to my children. I was seeing the damage I was doing to my marriage. And it was so easy for my mind to convince me that everybody would be better off if I was gone. And so it's very difficult for people to want to keep trying when they don't believe there's any hope for it changing. And when I was watching my kids play, I actually tell this story in detail in my book because it was such a pivotal experience for me. And I remember it very clearly. Watching my kids playing and realizing I would ruin my daughter's life if I did that. They mattered more to me than my own life did. That's why it was easy for my brain to convince me that they'd be better off, because I wanted to do what was best for them. And having something to keep trying for was what kept me going. And it's interesting. I coach people through the healing process on a regular basis. And that's the very first thing that I talk to them about is, what is the reason that you're doing this? Why do you want to get better? And it's important to get that clear in your mind so that you have a reason to keep trying, because healing is not an easy journey. It is so worth it. I'm grateful every day to be alive. I'm grateful that I wasn't successful in those attempts, and I'm thankful that I didn't give up. But at that time, it was really hard to keep moving forward. And so having a reason to try, having a reason to keep moving forward was critical to the success of, to continue motivating me to move forward on that healing journey.
Amazing. Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it's interesting that we've kind of been programmed and designed within medicine that, you get this diagnosis and that's it. Like, it's very different. Say, for example, I break my leg and there's an x-ray. I can see my leg is broken. That's the diagnosis, and there's a treatment plan. But when it comes to a cluster of symptoms, checking boxes that then fulfills a diagnostic criteria, there's a whole fascinating history in regards to the and you actually talk about it in your book as well, in regards to the mass increase in psychiatric diagnosis with medicines, and it's very, very contentious, and I'm highly skeptical of it for sure myself personally. But as you say, like, if you do give somebody that, let's call it a sentence, and the only thing you can do is manage it with medications. I know a few people with bipolar disorder, and they all started on one medication and it ends up being 7 or even more, because you're obviously dealing with side effects of medications, and there's another drug for this and that, and there's absolutely no science or research that shows like 2 or more of these drugs together what that does to the human body. So it really is this kind of guessing game when it comes to that patient doctor practice. And I want to ask you about your doctor, because what did you actually give him that encouraged him to consider an alternative to pharmaceuticals? Because you said that you'd already been working with him for 8 years.
Yeah.
And I'm sure for him as a doctor, like somebody who got into the profession to heal people, to get people out of their door rather than consistently coming in, and he was not seeing obviously any improvement. And I think just as a good human being, that would be quite demoralizing. So what did you actually give him to look down this alternative route?
I gave him I went into the Truehope website and printed off all the physician information that I could find, the studies and everything. Cause I would not have, I'm very grateful that he looked at it and that he agreed that it was an option, a viable option for me to try, because I don't think I would have tried it otherwise. I was so scared at that point of my symptoms. I was scared of the suffering, I was scared of what was happening. And that's one of the things that I think prevents people from seeking healing, is the fear.
Mhm.
These symptoms are so damaging. They're damaging to us emotionally. They're damaging to other people. I used to describe it to somebody, saying each time I started experiencing what I call mood cycles, it felt like holding on for dear life on a horrible roller coaster and then surveying the damage afterwards. It was just, I didn't feel like I had any control. And so when people are experiencing these irrational states of mind, the compulsive behaviors that come along with it, there's fear associated with, what if I'm wrong? What if this doesn't work?
Yep.
But I had gotten to a point, and I think that this was where my doctor was too, where nothing else was working. like we had tried everything. We'd exhausted all the medications at that point. I had a huge box of sample medications at one point because my doctor just started throwing everything at me. And he would give me a sample and I'd try it for a couple months and it wouldn't work. And, and it'd go in the box. And then I'd try another one and it wouldn't work. And I'd go in the box. And I didn't even understand at the time that a lot of the increase in the symptoms I was experiencing were like withdrawal symptoms from all these meds that I was going, because they don't titrate you off the meds. They say cut it in half for a few days and then stop taking it, and then you throw something else in there. And my brain was just fried by the time I was at the point in, 2009 and 2010 when I finally found True Hope. But, and my doctor even admitted to me, he was tremendously compassionate. He was a very compassionate doctor. I'd had a number of different psychiatrists. One of them I describe in the book was a German psychiatrist. She was my psychiatrist in Chicago, who she was like the quintessential psychiatrist. Like she reminded me very much of Freud. I walked in her office and she had one of those kind of duvet kind of couches that I thought she was going to have me lay down on. And she had zero bedside manner. She was very blunt, very kind of crisp, and she had this really thick German accent. And I trusted her because she seemed knowledgeable. But this doctor, he just was very compassionate. He was during my hospitalizations, the first 2 hospitalizations were at other hospitals with other doctors. And he was so infuriated when he found out what had been done to me when I was in those other hospitals, that he put he put in my notes in my file to prevent, doctors from prescribing certain medications in the future. He really cared about me. And I feel sad for people whose doctors are not open to exploring options that might be more beneficial to their patients because of the dogma of psychiatry that believes that, the only option is psychotropic drugs. And my doctor even admitted to me, a little while after I started titrating off the medications, that if I had brought that information to him a year ago, he may not have, or year previous, he may not have agreed. He may not have even looked at it because all of his training, in his medical training, had convinced him that the only valid option was psychotropic drugs, and then all of the continuing education was funded by pharmaceutical companies. And so there just wasn't any room to consider anything else.
Yeah, and we've spoken about this so many times on the podcast in regards to the ability to patent a medication that's novel and make money off that, and that's what goes through these research processes. This is what gets the money. This is what big pharma throws at research, so they're able to make money. But when it comes to vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, these things that are found in the natural world, these things aren't profitable. So that's a whole other topic, whole other podcast. But fascinating, the fact that at the end of the day, like, that you were just trying kind of anything and trying these samples, and ironically, like, that sounds like an incredibly unscientific way of going about anything. But you're in a desperate situation. At the end of the day, I've got a lot of compassion for your doctor, because he went to medical school. The only thing you can treat bipolar disorder with, and a lot of these other very serious psychological conditions, is pharmaceuticals. Where else would he possibly look? Like, they're not taught obviously about vitamins and minerals and the nutritional deficiency component when it comes to a lot of psychological disorders. If you're not taught that by by these professors, you go to these schools, you go to these very well established institutions, it wouldn't even be a thought. So unless something comes across your desk, or you have an experience with a patient where you were just willing to try anything, it's a shame that we don't have minerals and vitamins as a first line, because they're so unbelievably safe. And then trying something, pharmaceuticals should be like last resort, considering the side effects that people experience and the big pharmacological changes that can happen with an individual. But again, that's another podcast topic. But I wonder about this doctor now. Like, are you still in touch with him? Has his practice changed from the experience he had with you?
No, I actually tried to track him down a number of years ago, just to say thank you to him. I was so grateful. We moved from the area about 7 months after I started on the micronutrients, and I only saw him twice after he gave me the green light, because I went to him the first time for a check-in, and he just kind of, asked how things are going. The second time I went to him, I was struggling with some withdrawal symptoms, and he didn't know what to tell me. And he said, I think you need to talk to Truehope. So
Mhm.
at that point, I transitioned to Truehope, really. And then we moved, and I didn't really think about him for a number of years, but it wasn't until I got to the point where I realized, like, this is healing. Like, this is changing my life.
Mhm.
And I tried to contact him and was told by the receptionist at the clinic that he had retired and she believed he'd passed away. And I spent a bunch of money trying to track him down, just to make, because I really wanted to tell him how grateful I was to him, especially once I started, talking to other people whose doctors weren't willing to, consider it, weren't
Yeah.
willing to give them the green light. I didn't understand what a blessing it was to have him as my doctor. And
Mhm.
I was heartbroken that he passed away before I had a chance to say thank you to him, because he really saved my life.
Yeah, remarkable, remarkable. And I just wonder, like, before you found EMPower Plus and micronutrients, how much of your life was doctor's appointments and medications?
Everything revolved around it. It was, when you get to this point, it does kind of become like diabetes, where a diabetic is constantly checking their blood sugar, and your day is kind of all taken up uh, um with the illness, right? And so um it was ever present. It was like the thing that kind of ran my life. Medications, everything was around the medication, how I reacted to medications. If I was fatigued, I had to plan my life around, when I was awake, for things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Psychiatric appointments were, you didn't, the interesting thing about it is you don't see the psychiatrist very often. When you first the first intake is the most you'll ever see your psychiatrist, unless you're hospitalized. And you have like a 45-minute to an hour intake session, and you're supposed to tell them everything about your life in that time. And then they, confirm the diagnosis, or, I never had anybody question the diagnosis. I had a bunch of different psychiatrists, because I moved several times over those years. Everybody confirmed the diagnosis. I just went in and told them my history, and they would say, oh yeah, you got bipolar. It was bipolar 2 initially. And then you go in for med checks, and the med checks are, 15, maybe 30 minutes, but you're not going in to do anything other than check how the medication is working. And I remember at one point I would go to therapy appointments. I hated therapy for the first like 10 years. I tried to go to therapy, but what I was being told therapy was learning how to cope, learning coping mechanisms for the symptoms. And I didn't ever help me. Nothing I did ever impacted my ability to cope with what I was suffering with. And I didn't know until years later it was because my brain wasn't functioning in a healthy way.
Hmm.
The medications had caused a chemical imbalance in my brain. And that's another thing that I'll just mention here. I hate when doctors will say somebody's not med compliant. It doesn't, our brains don't feel right on the medications. They
Yeah.
don't. They never do. It doesn't matter. Even people that say they get relief from the medications know that their brains aren't working normally, you know?
Yeah.
And so there's a reason that a lot of people go off the medications, because your brain doesn't feel right.
Yeah. I can imagine that once you've once you've been inside your own brain with this type of a disorder and experiencing those types of symptoms, and then you go on a medication, I feel like any change is some sort of relief at some level.
Mm, I no. Well, and one of the things that's funny is interesting, I should say, maybe is a better word for it, is I interviewed Professor Joanna Roncrief, who is a professor over, or a psychiatrist over in the UK, who her entire career is focused on studying drug action.
Mm.
She's written books about what these drugs actually do, because she's really appalled by the fact that people are prescribing these medications without any kind of informed consent. People don't actually understand what these medications are doing in their brains. And so she said what she doesn't like when they call it side effects, because she said they're not a side effect. It's a side effect is the idea that it is doing this thing, and it happens to be doing this thing too. She
Hmm.
said it's not a side effect. That is what the drug is doing. And so she said the idea of a side effect gives undue credit to what the drug is supposedly doing. She
That's
doesn't like calling them
interesting.
antidepressants. She doesn't like calling them antipsychotics because it lends credibility to the medication that it doesn't deserve.
Interesting, yeah, because it's those side effects are just other known mechanisms of this drug.
Yeah, it's what the drug is doing to you. So
Yeah.
when somebody has sexual dysfunction, or when they're gaining a lot of weight, or they're saying it's a side effect, that is not a side effect. That's what the drug is doing to your body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wild. It's yeah, I mean this whole like chemical imbalance theory, and then you're just going into your psychiatrist for these medication kind of checkups. Yeah, if you're not having the conversations that are a little bit deeper and certainly a lot more meaningful than a 10-15 minute conversation, how are you ever really going to kind of get to the bottom about the experience that somebody may or may not be having on these meds, off these meds? It's yeah, it sounds so complex and complicated. And I think that yeah, there's disservice all over the place. And yeah, I'd love to be able to reference that doctor from the UK. So I'll make sure I get that and put that into the show notes
Yeah.
for other people, because I think a lot of people are very passionate about this topic, and just the idea that that we're calling these these side effects. It's a very interesting, different way of thinking about these things. And yeah, like I guess a lot of patients are not being told exactly how this product is going to affect them.
Yeah, she's written some really great books. This one that I've got right here is called A Straight Talking Introduction to Psychiatric Drugs: The Truth About How They Work and How to Come Off Them. And that was a really eye-opening book for me, because it was the first time that I'd read something that actually told me what the drugs were doing. It was so informative. I wish that I'd had it before I took psych meds, because then I would
Mhm.
have understood better what was actually happening in my brain. We are convinced that these medications are normalizing our brain. They're not. They're not normalizing our brain. And the whole paradigm of this diagnosis, the idea that bipolar disorder is a chemical imbalance, it effectively ends the curiosity about what the underlying source of the symptoms actually is. And that's the problem itself. That is the
Yeah.
issue, because these symptoms are serious, and they're a serious indication of distress. There's something going on. It's like having a fever. The way that we treat psychiatric diagnosis would be similar to somebody who's running a fever over and over again, and the fever is getting worse and worse. And so you finally go to the doctor and say, I don't know why I keep running these fevers, and you're running a really high fever. And they're like, oh, well, you've got fever disorder.
Mhm.
We're going to put you on anti-inflammatories for the rest of your life, and that'll manage the fevers.
Yeah.
That sounds ridiculous, but that's what we're doing with psychiatric diagnoses. We're not having any curiosity about what is actually causing the brain to act this way, and we
Yeah.
call it a disorder. So we think that there's something wrong, meaning the brain is malfunctioning in some way, when in fact, often that is the brain's doing its job and we're not listening to it.
Beautifully said. Yeah, I don't think anyone would be able to convince me that bipolar disorder or schizophrenia are pharmaceutical deficiency disorders, and you just need drugs to be able to fix that.
Yeah.
Like it's not, that doesn't make any sense
Yeah.
to me. But for a lot of people, it does, because people have things wrong with them and they go to the doctor and they get a pill.
Yeah.
Like that's the process. That's what we've literally been programmed to believe. And unless you go through something like you've gone through, and you are then transformed, you're remotivated, and you're angry and you're inspired to learn more and read alternative perspectives. And there are phenomenal scientists and researchers out there that have done the work, have done the homework, or asking the questions. But it's so unbelievably impossible to kind of break through that pharmacological model that's so influential within every medical establishment across the planet. It's a very, very big thing. But that's why we have these conversations, and that's why you write amazing books, and you have this blog, and you have this, because we have to spread the word, and
Yeah.
and it's a calling, and it's a gift to be able to do so. But I'd like to just switch up a second, because as I was reading through your book and the chapter where you talk about True Hope and your experience there, I wondered what your partner's experience was during your struggles and during your awakening. I wonder if you wouldn't mind touching on that a little bit, because you don't really hear about caregivers too much, and I think it's a very important place to avert some attention.
Yeah, it's interesting. I learned a lot looking back. While I was going through it, when you're in crisis, you don't really think about anything. In fact, our system is set up to kind of foster self-centeredness in people who are struggling with mental health challenges. And I'm not saying that to be mean. It's just the reality.
Yeah.
My soul often rejected what I was being told. They would say, no, they just need to understand it's not your fault. And I think, well, maybe it's not my fault, but it's not my husband's fault. And it's definitely not my children's fault. And my husband, during the time that I was the most sick during our marriage, he was working a lot of hours. He was working like 13, 14 hours, 7 days a week. He was in manufacturing. And so he was gone a lot. And he couldn't see how bad things had gotten while he was doing that. He was going to school off and on during that first 7 years of our marriage as well. And so I feel so sad for him looking back, because he couldn't see how bad things were until I was in the hospital. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, it does.
But
yeah.
he just was, he was trying so hard to keep food on the table, make sure that the family had what they needed, trying to improve his ability to provide. And he talks about when I was hospitalized, the year that I had my breakdown, he was the one who prevented me the 3 times that I made attempts on my life. And something broke inside him at that point. Like he didn't know what to do anymore. He saw somebody that he loved with all his heart suffering in a way that he didn't know how to help. And something broke. And we had like a wall between us emotionally for years after that. And he could feel it, I could feel it, and he didn't know what to do about it. He didn't know how to address it. He didn't know how to fix it. Because it wasn't something he consciously did. It was just a survival mechanism within himself. And it took a lot of years. And for me, what I would tell people that are, there's 2 sides to this. One is I realized that I had to just focus on healing. I needed to do everything that I could to take responsibility for myself. I, developed something called a mood cycle survival guide, which is for me, it's the first step in healing. That's what I teach everybody. Learn how to take responsibility for your symptoms, learn how to be self-aware, learn how to stand up for yourself, learn how to ask for help and who to ask, for help from. And it's about taking personal responsibility and learning how to manage your symptoms, learn how to take care of yourself, learn how to ask for help in a way that doesn't burn bridges. I think that that's one of the things that can be really challenging. And part of the problem with all of it is when we're told that we don't have any control over this, when we're told that this is an illness that we have, it's a disorder that we have, a lot of times people kind of don't understand that they can have any ability to control it. And it also causes can often lead to really unhealthy boundaries in relationships. My husband, it took a long time for us to kind of unwind the codependency in our marriage, because our early marriage was impacted severely by my mental health challenges. And we developed some really unhealthy dynamics in our relationship that had to be kind of worked through with a marriage therapist. And when I work with people in my program, I often invite them to have their, somebody, whoever their primary caregiver or partner or whoever it is, participate, because they need to know how to set healthy boundaries. They need to know what they can do to support and what's not their responsibility. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard because, like I said, the whole paradigm of treatment fosters self-centeredness in us, and that's not healthy. It's not healthy for us. It makes us feel like we don't have any ability to take care of ourselves. We can see the damage we're doing to other people, and it makes us feel terrible.
Yeah.
And then it's really hard on relationships. We burn bridges all the time in these situations because you don't know how to ask for help until you're in crisis. And when you're always in crisis, when you go to people, they get worn out,
Yeah,
I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does. And it's an interesting perspective. That's kind of why I asked the question, because
Yeah.
I think that for a lot of people who may be listening, they are going to have people in their lives who are, suffering from something. And it's over time, it's without question going to change the dynamics. It's going to change how people communicate with each other. And yeah, I think that we have a massive lack of in schools of teaching kids how to communicate with each other to be able to do it better when they're adults. But if you throw in like a bombshell of like a bipolar disorder into one of those individuals, it makes it even more complex. It makes it even more complicated, and it requires a very significant skill set to be able to do that. And I'm aware of a lot of people like yourself who have gone through something and they have these amazing outlets like podcasts to be able to talk about it. But there's not enough, in my opinion, of people talking about the caregivers and what they've gone through and the challenges that they've been through and how they're able, because they obviously have their own mental health. They've got their own things going on, and it's really, really, really challenging. Like I find it really challenging when my wife's sick and I've got to take more of her like parental responsibility. Like that's difficult. It's part of my role, but sometimes that's where it's a challenge. So yeah, it's interesting, and it'd be great if we could hear more from individuals like your partner to be able to support other partners going through that with other people, because I think in your situation, maybe 5 times out of 10 partners would just leave somebody else. I've had people on the podcast before where their partners have just like left the door because it's too much for them.
Well, and I told my husband, I asked him for years, like, why didn't you just leave me? 2008, that year was awful, 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 awful. Because not only were there the hospitalizations, 3 hospitalizations, multiple suicide attempts, but I was also like up and down all over the place. One day I'm in love with my husband and he's the best person ever. The next day I'm sure I have to leave him. He said that my personality completely changed, the way that I was behaving completely changed. And when I would ask him, in the years after that, like, why didn't you just leave? Like, I would not have blamed you if you left. I don't know if I could have handled it, had the roles been reversed. And he couldn't give me an answer. And it wasn't until like a year and a half ago when he finally agreed to be on my podcast that he was finally able to articulate, like, I didn't leave because I'd made a commitment and I wanted to keep my commitment, and I'm sad when partners actually do leave. It's sad for both sides of it. It's sad for both parties. But I want to say I am a huge advocate for healthy boundaries in these relationships. One thing that I have seen some people who advocate for the caregivers who, talk about taking on responsibility for their partner because they don't have any control and that. And I think, no, like you have to have healthy boundaries or else you end up with 2 partners that are sick. Then both people's mental health is suffering, and that's not good for anybody.
Yeah. Well, so he was on your podcast and you kind of spoke all about it.
Yeah. It was very hard to get him to do it because he's a very, very private person. And he kept saying, I kept asking him, like, would you be willing to come on? I'll prep you beforehand. And he kept saying, no, he's like, I'm really private. I don't want this stuff out there. And I'm like, I'm sorry to break it to you, but it's all out there already. Like, I have shared everything with the world. There are no more secrets, And so, but he was very gracious in being willing to come on, and he's so supportive. And I'm just really grateful that he chose to stay. I'll be forever grateful for that.
Me too. Well, I'm going to check out that episode for sure, and I'll get that into the description. I just dropped my notes here. I'm just going to grab them. So give me a second. I've also just did a leg day yesterday, so my legs are light. So it's going to take me a while. All right, I'm back, everyone. All right, hi. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thanks for sharing so much about your partner there. It's such an interesting journey, and I'm just so grateful that you had Peggy, you had your best friend who put you on towards Truehope. You had a very understanding, wonderful psychiatrist who, wherever he is, whatever's going on, I feel knows that was the right decision and that you're doing great. And also your partner as well. Like you've got these phenomenal people in your life, and what inspiration and motivation you've got now going forward to continue your work. It's just absolutely amazing. In the chapter in your book, chapter 6, where you're talking about Truehope, you were talking about experiencing longer periods of emotional stability day after day, month after month, year after year, after beginning taking EMPower Plus, these micronutrient formulas. And I just wanted to get an idea of more in the beginning stages, like what does a day look like with just small periods of emotional stability against having those longer periods?
Well, the thing that was interesting at first was that when you are so used, like our brains develop patterns, they develop kind of pathways. And my brain was so used to the instability that the stability initially caused some anxiety for me because I didn't trust it. Like there was this like waiting for the other shoe to drop kind of thing.
Hmm.
And um and so the stability was like I was really grateful for it, but anytime I would start to feel happy or feel good, I was like, "Oh my gosh, am I getting manic?" So it took a while for me to be comfortable with the stability. And I had this sense that sometimes maybe I was creating emotional imbalances in myself by anticipating something, was about to happen. I had a really hard time trusting myself. In fact, one of the experiences that I share in the book is I had, since I was very young, I'd wanted to homeschool my children since before I
Hmm.
even had kids. I'd always wanted to homeschool, but once I started having children, I'm like, there's no way I could do that. Like I was so sick with the bipolar symptoms. Once I got off the medication, I started thinking, "Oh, maybe I could." Like, I would really like to. I'd love to teach my kids at home. I had done a lot of work when I was younger in college, like preparing myself because I thought I was going to do that.
Hmm.
And a sister of mine found out that I was, she was one that was there when I had my psychotic episode. She'd seen me in the hospitalization. So caught wind that I was planning on homeschooling my kids and called and told me that she thought I was manic, and I started thinking, oh my gosh, am I manic? Like I didn't trust my brain. I had a really hard time trusting my brain. But one of the keys to this was asking my husband for feedback.
Yeah.
So we developed a pattern in our relationship where I would ask him, do you think I'm manic? Can you tell me if you see warning signs that maybe I'm becoming symptomatic in any way? And at first he was afraid to do it because anytime he would talk, say something to me, I'd like bite his head off. And he's like, not doing that again. That's a trap. But we had to come up with a way for him to approach me. He would say we decided that what he would do is say, I'm seeing something. Are you open to some feedback? And that was the magic, thing that I would, yes, I'm going to calm myself down and I'm going to listen because I know you love me, or
Hmm.
no, I'm too worked up right now, talk to me another time about it. And that was really helpful to me to have him, because he told me, I called him that day crying because I was like, oh my gosh, am I getting manic and I don't realize it? And he said, nope, she hasn't seen you. He
Yeah.
said, this is the longest I've ever seen you stable. And so that was really helpful to me to have an outside perspective to reassure me, because it's all inside our heads. Like all of these symptoms are in our head. When the people, will make the kind of snide comment, it's all in your head. It really is. It's all in our head. And so learning how to trust our brains is really challenging sometimes, especially with as long as I was struggling, learning how to trust it and be confident in it. But over time, I started recognizing the difference. And it was really helpful because the chemical version of my brain felt very different from when I had symptoms when I was off the medications. It felt very different.
Hmm.
So I started noticing the difference between hypomanic symptoms when I was medicated and hypomanic symptoms when I was unmedicated. And the reason why I even had them was because there was an underlying distress there in the first place, right? And there was, I had a history, I had severe abuse from my first marriage that hadn't been dealt with. I had childhood bullying. I had a lot of things that had caused emotional dysregulation over the years that needed to be addressed. And so once we got the medication out of the way, like True Hope really was the first step on that path. It was the first step towards healing because it got the medication out of the way so that I could actually start to address the issues that had caused this emotional dysregulation in my brain.
Hmm. Yeah, I wanted to ask you. So, when you began taking Empower Plus, when your psychiatrist gave you the green light to try this, how many pharmaceutical medications were you on when you started to take Empower Plus, and what was that journey to being just on Empower Plus?
Well, okay, so there's something that I don't talk about. I'm going to talk about it a little bit briefly here. I had started titrating off of meds prior to finding Truehope because I'd found one other product. And I don't share that with people because I learned later that it was actually had ingredients that interfere with the absorption of EMPower, and I discontinued that product.
Okay.
So I had started the cross titration process. The initial med that I was.
Sorry, can you explain what cross titration is, and then maybe say it because I can't say it.
Yeah, so cross titration. The reason why I use that language instead of cross tapering, which is what I think that Truehope's customer support uses, is I've just read it more. I've read it in other publications and that, and so it seemed to be more commonly used, and so that's why I use that language. But cross titration or cross tapering is when you are starting to take the Truehope products, and then as your brain starts to heal, you slowly, very slowly, taper off of the medications. And I always caution people whenever I'm talking to them about the dangers of psychotropic drugs and that, do not go off of your medications on your own. Don't ever do it, because it can be life-threatening. Like, the withdrawal symptoms are so severe often for people that it can actually be life-threatening. And so I always tell people, you need to work with an expert. You need to work with somebody who understands what this drug has done to your brain and how to safely withdraw from it, so that you can get your brain the support it needs in the process of going through withdrawal. And people that go through my program, I always encourage them, not encourage them, I instruct them as how to utilize Truehope's customer support in the most effective way, and how to understand what's happening in their brain when they get over medicated or go through withdrawal and that. But when I first was going through that process, I had nobody to help me other than Truehope, and even my doctor didn't know what to tell me. One of the withdrawal symptoms that I had, or the over medication symptoms that I had that was so weird, was I could taste the medication in my mouth. That was my last appointment with my doctor. I called him and I'm like, I need to see the doctor. And he had me in and I said, I can taste the medication in my mouth. And he's like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, he'd never heard of that before. And I told him, I said, it's so potent in my mouth that it feels like I've sucked on the pill. And so, that was something I was really grateful for, it because it was not comfortable, but it wasn't a severe symptom. It was just something that was like, I started to be very aware when I was getting over medicated, because I started to be able to taste the medications in my mouth. And so the withdrawal process for me, my husband and I tried to go back through my journals and see if we can kind of piece together the timeline. But between the two of us, we think it was about a 6-month period total from the beginning to the end of the process. And the end of the process for me was really pronounced because I woke up one day and it felt like I was fully awake for the first time in a decade. And I called my husband at work. I was so excited and he thought I was manic. Like, he was like, oh, call your doctor, maybe you need to call the doctor or something. And I'm like, no, I don't know how to describe to you what I'm feeling. Like, this isn't, I'm not manic. I just feel awake. And it's so hard for somebody who hasn't experienced what it feels like, because most of these drugs have a sedative effect on our brains. Like, I felt tired for over a decade. I always felt tired. I never felt fully awake.
So was it over 10 years that you last experienced that?
Yeah.
Wow.
When my very first medication that they put me on was Zoloft, and I was on it for a little bit over 3.5 years. And I was so tired all the time that I could sleep. No matter how much sleep I got, I could sleep anywhere. I would fall asleep all over the place. I was on the bus one time when I lived in Seattle, and I slept through my bus stop all the way to the bus station. Like, I woke up in the bus station when the bus drivers, like, you have to get off now. And I'm like, where am I? But I was so tired all the time. And every medication had that kind of sedative effect for me. It was just varying degrees of sedation is what it felt like all the time. And so that feeling of awake was such a relief. It just, being tired was normal at that point. And so this relief of like, oh my gosh, my brain's awake it was just, I was so happy.
I love it. I love it so much. And yeah, you were talking about how your doctor wasn't aware of like what the route to coming off medications is, because very, very clearly they're taught how to get people on medications, not to get them off them, right? So I feel like, and please let me know your experience, because you've worked with a lot of people who have, come off medications to switch to micronutrients to alleviate serious disorders. But I think that if you were to go to your doctor saying you wanted to get off these types of medications, it's going to be received as insult, perhaps. So what's
Oh,
your
yeah.
experience with that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I have a fine line that I have to walk because I can't tell people you need to come off your medications
Right.
because it's not, I would be liable at that point. But when somebody comes to me and they want to come off their medications, uh, I have not yet had anybody come to me where their doctors were on board.
No.
Not one person. And it makes them scared because they're afraid of like, what if the doctor's right? But most times by the time they come to me, they're like fed up and they're ready for something different. Like it can't get any worse than what it is where they are.
Right.
And they're hoping that maybe it could be better. And it's the thing that is, I tell people that it is critical is that you cannot use your own judgment in this process. You cannot. When
Interesting.
somebody decides they want to go through cross titration and they want to come off these medications, they have to listen to the expert that is helping them. I encourage people to utilize the True Hope customer support because they're so knowledgeable. They've got, you guys have over 2 decades of experience with working with people on these medications. You understand the drug action. You understand how they interact with things. Um, and I've watched people go successfully through this process, and the ones who don't get through it successfully, and the ones who don't get through it successfully are the ones who just choose to do something different.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes, part of the challenge is being patient with the process because we are so anxious to get off of these medications that sometimes they're like, they just think, well, I don't think I need to be on it anymore. I think I can
Yeah.
just come off. And I tell them like, please don't do that. You need to go slowly. You have to be patient. And it's not a comfortable experience. One of the things that we do in the program is people they have to learn what over medication feels like for them. And it's different for everybody. Everybody has a different experience. Their body chemistry is different. The medications they're on vary from person to person. But they have to learn what over medication feels like. They have to learn how long that they're going to experience that over medicated feeling. And then they have to learn how long withdrawal lasts for them. And so, I see an average, I will say, I see an average of like 48 to 72 hours on each of these. And what I have people do is learn what it looks like, and then how can you manage it? If I'm going to experience this for the next 72 hours, it doesn't feel comfortable, but after 72 hours, I'll start to feel relief. Then you can put some kind of boundaries in place, some things in place that are going to help you kind of manage that over the next 72 hours, and
Mhm.
so, and once you get into that pattern, then okay, next time I'll get, maybe 3 weeks. I don't know. It's different for everybody, but maybe you'll get 3 or 4 weeks of relief and you're feeling okay. And then you'll start to feel over medicated again.
Yeah.
And it's just a pattern that you go through and you get better at it. You get better at managing it. You understand what's happening. And then, there's the other thing that people have to learn is when to call True Hope. A lot of times that because we're so used to these symptoms, withdrawal symptoms often look a lot like the symptoms of the quote unquote disorder. And we have these coping mechanisms that our brains automatically go to, and we don't recognize, like, I don't need to suffer like this. This is over medication, or I don't need to suffer like this. This is, this is just withdrawal. I'll be okay in a little bit. And I always tell people, as soon as you feel any symptoms at all, call True Hope.
Yeah.
Call them and ask them, tell them what's going on. They may say, this is normal. You're going to, it'll be uncomfortable for a couple of days, or they may say, we need to make a change. But don't wait. Always call them as soon as you start feeling it. Call them right away. That's what they're there for. That's, they're the experts. And then listen to them and do what they tell you to do.
Love it. Well said. Can you maybe explain a little bit to people about how some medications, well, actually all medications, especially taken over a long period of time, how they can be stored in the body?
Oh,
And
yeah.
how when you do come off medications and you stop them, there is this, our body does this amazing. I'll let you explain it. You know what I'm talking about. Go for it.
Yeah. So med release was something that I didn't understand. I didn't know anything about this initially. There's so there was so much new information that it was hard to understand exactly what they were talking about. And I'm sure True Hope at some point warned me about med releases, but I didn't retain that. And the first time I experienced it, I didn't know what was happening. So it was when we went through a move. We I moved right during the cross titration process. I actually moved, and then about little over a year later, we moved again, and I became hypomanic during the move, and then crashed afterwards. And it was a pretty, I had about a week of pretty bad depression, and my coping mechanism is binge watching. And so I was like, I spent a week in front of the television, like all day long, every day for a week.
What'd you watch?
The first move was, let's see, the first move was Law and Order SVU, like 20 seasons of it. Wow. And when I say binge watching, I'm not talking about Netflix binge watching over the weekend. I'm talking about like 7, 8, 9 days straight of all day long, late into the night, forgetting to eat, like I obsessively watching. It was really unhealthy. Mm-hmm. And I didn't understand. Looking back, I understand what was happening. The next move after that was only like 9 months later. We had a really kind of sudden job situation that required a move. And so we found out, from the day we found out to the day we were moving was 2 weeks later. Yeah. And I crashed really hard that time. It was like a 2-week depression. And I finally, after about a week and a half, I started worrying that the micronutrients weren't working. Like I was like, something's wrong. I don't know what's going on. Because I was at a point where I thought maybe I need to go into the hospital, but I didn't want to go get medicated, but I didn't know what was going on. And so I called True Hope, and they explained about med releases. They said that your body, these psychotropic medications can get stored in your soft tissues for up to like 10 years. Mm-hmm. And they have no way of knowing how much is in your body still. And anytime you go through like super intense exercise, and I found this out the hard way when I started training for triathlons, or, really intense stressors in your life, like a move, it can cause this medication. I think they call it med pockets, but they get released into your body. And when your body doesn't need it anymore, it causes the symptoms that it was designed to prevent in the first place. And so my reaction to these med releases was always really bad depression. Fatigue and depression were the two symptoms that I would experience. And one thing that I warned people about actually in the book is I was so frustrated because once they told me about this, I'm like, oh, that's what happened last time. I don't want to have this happen again. I just want to get it out of my system. And I happened to mention to the lady that I was speaking to in customer support that can I just do a cleanse and get it out of my system? And she's like, absolutely not. Do not do that. We don't know how much medication's in your system, and we don't want to push it all into your system at once. It could be really dangerous. Yeah. I didn't listen to her. I went to the health food store. I thought I knew better. And I went to the health food store and got a liver cleanse stuff and started it. And 2 days into it, I had the most severe depression that I'd had since my hospitalization. Realized my mistake, called True Hope crying. And they said, we are so sorry that that's happening to you. And they walked me through what to do. And it took a few more days to correct the mistake that I'd made and get that stuff out of my system. And then I was okay. And I never went against True Hope's advice again, ever.
Yeah, it's I find it fascinating that the body can see these dangerous foreign entities as drugs coming in and wrapping it up in fat and storing it away to keep you protected. Yeah. And then once you were to exercise or train for a triathlon, your body's obviously needs those fats for energy release, and those chemicals get released back out, and then you feel that massive pharmacological change because these are very, very potent, very, very strong medications. But it's also amazing that the body can recover from something like that. But it's so obviously important to be aware. And I recall reading your book that you've got a couple of disclaimers in there, and one of them is around those detoxes that people can be so they're super motivated, inspired to make these changes. They want it to happen right away. And you could go to a health food store and pick up numerous amounts of detoxes because you're so desperate to get that out of you because you want to become somebody new. But there is a process because these things are powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said, well said. But I want to talk about what is a mood cycle survival guide. You mentioned that in the show already. You mentioned it in the
Yeah.
book a bunch,
Yeah.
and you also said earlier today that it's one of the primary foundational things that people need to do.
Yeah, it's my first step. It was the first thing that I started doing that actually was me taking responsibility for myself. This was before I found True Hope. And it actually ended up, I looking back, recognized how beneficial it was for me in the cross titration process and, in that whole thing, because I had started to become much more self-aware. So the mood cycle survival guide was something that I started developing for myself when I recognized nobody was coming to help me. I had to figure out how to help myself. This was after I had made that commitment that I was never going to allow myself to be in danger of suicidal action. Um, and it was towards the end of that first year when I ended up hospitalized again, and I was so frustrated that I ended up in the hospital, and I was at home watching my kids play, and I had this thought: nobody's coming to save me.
Mm.
There's got to be a way to do this better. There has to be a way to manage this better. If I know that I'm going to experience these symptoms, how can I be more proactive about taking care of it? And so I developed this plan, and it developed over time. The first step in the plan is, who is your team? Who is your response team? When we're struggling with these kinds of things, you need help. But it's really important to identify who can help you, what their role is, and set healthy boundaries around that so that you don't burn all those bridges. You don't want to destroy relationships because you
Mhm.
don't know how to ask for help until you're in crisis. And so by identifying who your team is, who are the people who you can ask for help. And my number one on that team is actually True Hope customer support. On my mood cycle survival guide is True Hope customer support, because they're always the first call. Whenever I'm struggling, if I ever had symptoms, um, I would call True Hope first, because usually there's something that needs to be adjusted. But then, we got clear boundaries in my marriage. What things could my husband help me with, and what things weren't his responsibility? And so that's the first step in this process: is who's your team? Who can you ask for help, and what are the boundaries around that assistance? And then the second step in this guide is identifying what I call your early warning system. And this is where you start to become much more self-aware about what your symptoms are. What are your symptoms? What do they look like? And what are the triggers for symptoms? Because when we start making those correlations, we can start to, they're clues as to what's actually happening, what's going
Mhm.
on with you. And I use in that part of the guide, I encourage people to use a mood tracking app, because oftentimes we just feel like victims to these things, especially things like anxiety. If you have an anxiety attack or something like that, it feels like you're having it, out of the blue. And oftentimes there are kind of precursors. If you start to pay attention, you start to recognize there are things that are happening before that that let you know that kind of storm is coming,
Yeah.
so you can kind of prepare yourself. And then the third step in that guide is your, what I call the power priorities. And this came actually out of an experience that we had with an ice storm that came through when we lived in Ohio, where the power was knocked out for 5 days. We had no power at all. It was like horrible suffering. We were so cold, no hot food, no hot showers, no heat in our home. And some friends of ours invited us over to have something to eat at their house, and they had a generator. And we were in the heat. We got to have a warm shower and a warm meal. And we were asking them questions about their generator, because we're thinking we need to get a generator. And it was the first time that I understood, when you have a power generator, it does not power your whole house. You have to identify the power priorities within your home. What are the things that you really need? And then the rest of the power just waits until the power comes back on.
Mhm.
And that was for me a kind of a clue for how do I manage my emotional resources when I don't have as much to give. What a lot of times when people are struggling with depressive episodes, for example, I used to try to keep doing everything, and it felt like climbing a hill in a mudslide. The harder I tried to do everything, the worse it got, the further down I got. The same thing was kind of true on the other end. With when I would get hypomanic, I would start huge projects and get going on big things, and the things that mattered most would get neglected. And so this power priorities was me identifying what are the things that matter most, that need to be done no matter what. And then when the emotional resources are offline, those are the things that get the attention, and the rest of it has to wait until everything's back online. And then the fourth piece of that guide is how do you get things back online? How do you reboot your system and get yourself back to a healthy, balanced mental state? And I always have people start with this, make sure that they've got this in place even before they go through cross titration, because that is going to help them be more effective in cross titration. It helps them become much more self-aware. A lot of times when we're going through, the experience of cross titration, when you experience the symptoms of like over medication or withdrawal or whatever, we're not being self-aware as far as what we're actually experiencing. It can feel overwhelming. We can feel scared. But when you start to be more clinical in your approach to it, when you start tracking the symptoms, you start to see patterns. It's easier to see, okay, so this is what I feel when I start to feel over medicated. Maybe I'm starting to get really bad headaches, or I start to get nauseous, or I get agitated really easily. And when you start identifying those as symptoms instead of moral failings in some way, then you don't feel guilty about it. You don't feel bad about yourself. You start recognizing them for what they are. And then you can also see how long they're lasting. So it gives, the more information you have and the more self-aware you are, the more empowered you feel to be able to keep moving forward on this healing path.
Yeah, it makes an unbelievable amount of sense in regards to being able to prepare yourself properly and look back at those patterns and being a little bit more aware. And you'd have to have these things tracked and then apps so you can actually see that data. It makes so much sense, and we're lucky and blessed that we've actually got these things. And you've gone through this journey and created this, and I'm sure you outline that significantly in the book, right?
Yep.
Amazing. I want to talk about your third pregnancy. So in May 2013, you found out you were having your third baby, and your endocrinologist warned you that another pregnancy was going to basically kill your thyroid gland.
Yeah.
But you didn't believe that would happen. And I want to know why you believed that.
Yeah. So my first two pregnancies, I had a really severe postpartum hyperthyroid condition. And most people are aware of hypothyroidism, which is when your thyroid isn't functioning at the level it needs to, like it's low functioning.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes when people have hypothyroidism, like they'll gain a lot of weight, they have low energy. I was on the other side of that. My metabolism was in overdrive. And I'd never had a baby before. So my first time having this, I didn't know that it was wrong, that there was anything wrong until I had lost significant amount of weight. And I'd lost a ton of weight. I was losing a ton of hair. Like when I rubbed my head, it felt like I'd shaved my head because so much hair had fallen out and was regrowing. And I was having really bad dizzy spells. Anytime I would stand up, I would black out.
Mm-hmm.
It was dangerous. Like I was afraid to drive. It was really bad. My mom thought I was anorexic because I had lost so much weight. You could see my ribs, and I was eating all the time. So she was worried that I was developing an eating disorder and I couldn't get enough food in my body. And the second time it happened, it was even worse. And that was when they finally sent me to an endocrinologist, and they said, you have what's called postpartum hyperthyroidism. And I was told that if I had another baby, I would destroy my thyroid because it was getting progressively worse.
Yeah.
But I was convinced that it actually had something to do with the medication I was taking, because the onset of the symptoms correlated with when I started back onto the psychotropic drugs after my pregnancies. So both of my first two pregnancies, I was off medications, except with one exception. I had one antidepressant that I took all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
But most of my medications were not safe for pregnancy. And so about 3 months after both of my children were born, I had the onset of pretty severe symptoms. And so they had me stop nursing and go back on the medications. And the onset of the symptoms correlated with the drug building up in my system.
Yeah.
And when I asked the doctor, this endocrinologist about it, he's like, oh, absolutely not. Those are not even related. And I kept thinking in my head, they seem related. They seem correlated with each other. So when I had that third baby, I was very nervous because I thought, what if the doctor was right? What if I destroy my thyroid?
Yeah.
But something inside me told me, no, you're going to be okay. And not only did I not have a recurrence of the symptoms, I actually had to work really hard to lose the baby weight. I gained a lot of weight during that pregnancy. I gained about 70 pounds during that pregnancy. And I had to work really hard to lose the weight afterwards. And it was the first time that I'd had to work to lose weight because it just fell off literally before. And this was the first time that I had a healthy pregnancy experience and postpartum experience. And
And
I
that
didn't have those severe onset of symptoms after my third pregnancy either. I didn't have like the depression. I didn't have the the mood swings. I didn't have any of that. I was able to nurse my baby all the way through her first year. It was amazing.
And just to be clear, that third amazing pregnancy, you were on EMPower Plus.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I started on EMPower Plus in 2010, and I got pregnant with her in 2013. So I'd been off medications for about 3 years at that point.
Well, what a testament to mothers to be out there in regards to micronutrients and the fact that pharmaceuticals during those times are significantly dangerous, not just during pregnancy, but afterwards as well. And the build up and the storage that we spoke about before as well. And I just want to mention in regards to like the thyroid issue, like EMPower Plus on its own is really amazing for like low grade thyroid issues because of its combinations of magnesium, selenium, inositol, iodine, vitamin C, B2, B3. But for anything a little bit more serious than that, we have an amazing nascent iodine product that you can take, as well as an inositol one as well. So yeah, thyroid health is a big problem in regards to a lot of people suffering, especially women, those hormonal imbalances. So yeah, not only does EMPower Plus is significantly powerful for your brain, but also like we have combinations of products that work wonderful for thyroid health as well. And we're just dealing with root cause issues, and the majority of them being significant chronic nutrient deficiencies, especially in the brain. And it's such a simple solution, but again, we've been programmed to think that drugs are the best and we should just all be taking wonderful drugs.
Well, and the other thing that it caused me to start thinking about was the occurrence of what we call postpartum depression, the PPD.
Mm-hmm.
We give these poor mothers whose brains just need a little more support, medications, and we further dysregulate their brains, and it just breaks my heart for them because, it's the most logical thing in the world to recognize you're going through significant hormone change. Your body has just gone through significant stress, and you're going through sleeplessness. You're going there's all of these stressors that require more help. Like your brain needs more help. And most women who are going through that are not getting the nutrition that they need. Right. So we already have a hard time getting the nutrition our bodies need. And then during that, anyone who's gone through that, understands we're sleep deprived, we're not eating healthy, there's all kinds of things going on, and our brains just aren't getting the support they need. And then we get depressed, and then they give us drugs.
I'm no way comparing this example to pregnancy, but when I know I've got like a stressful week, or if I'm traveling, or something is going to happen in the future that I know my body's going to need to galvanize its resources, I increase my dosage of EMPower Plus in regards to make sure my body has got enough vitamins, it's got enough minerals, it's got the right antioxidants in the right combinations to be able to deal with that extra stress. And I couldn't think of anything more incredible and stressful than trying to grow another human being inside of another human being, and then having to get that human being out of that human being and then recover. Like without question, the most key time to be able to be storing your body and getting your body used to that influx of good quality proper nutrition, not just within the body but in the brain as well. And most products, almost all of them apart from ours, really, in regards to minerals being able to be absorbed through the blood-brain barrier and get into the brain, most products go through a 4-hour chelation process, meaning the minerals getting broken down to be absorbed. Ours goes through a 4-day process, and that's why we see the significant impacts on the brain in a very positive way. And that's why we've had 25 years of remarkable research and remarkable results. And we didn't really touch on it at the beginning when we were talking about how you were able to share all those research papers with your doctor. If somebody's listening to this in Canada and goes to TrueHope Canada to do exactly the same thing as you did, to print them off and send them to your doctor, you're going to find all of those papers on our website censored because Health Canada deems it illegal for us to share truthful health information government funded research. It's absolutely mind blowing. But if you really did want to find those research papers, you could definitely find them somewhere. So don't let that stop you. But
Simon, can I mention one other thing?
Please.
One of the things that a lot of, I think might be a question mark in people's minds is most women's doctors will prescribe prenatal vitamins for women. Yeah. And they think, well, if vitamins were really, what the problem was, then wouldn't that mitigate it? But the problem is after 2010, there were 2 times when I tried alternative products. So there were twice when I had companies that people told me, oh, these are the best, vitamins on the market. They're so, they're so much more absorbable. Yeah. And I believed them. And at one point I even compared the backs of the containers, Truehope's, to this other product, and they looked very similar. And so both times I tried these other products, and within a very short period of time, started to feel symptoms coming back. And when I actually had Dr. Bonnie Kaplan on my podcast, and I've spoken with her. I've read her book. Her book is fantastic. If anybody if anybody's out there that wants to learn more about this, read The Better Brain. That was a life-changing book for me. But vitamins and minerals, our bodies have a really hard time absorbing them in pill form because that's not the natural source for us, right? And Truehope has done such a phenomenal job of figuring out how to make sure that the body can actually absorb the vitamins and minerals and get them into the system so that you're not just flushing it through your system. Mm-hmm. Most of the vitamins that we're being, as women are being prescribed by our doctors aren't effective. They just go right through our bodies. Yep. And so that's why there are so many women suffering from these postpartum that are taking these vitamins, because they're not actually absorbable. Our brains aren't getting the nutrients into them.
And you mentioned it in your book, and it's something I say all of the time to people when they ask me about, like, why EMPower Plus, why this product and not the thousands of other micronutrient formulas that are on the shelf. But almost all other natural health products, especially here in Canada, don't have 35 peer-reviewed research papers proving that they work. There's obviously research that vitamin C is beneficial. There's lots of research in regards to other minerals and other vitamins as well, like individually. But as an actual product, the research is there. That's the proof. And I'm like, why would you choose anything else? Like, I don't really understand that. But I guess some people have to just like dive a little bit more in deep. And I know way too many people that buy their supplements from Costco and throwing their money down the toilet. Yeah, literally down the toilet. So yeah, it's interesting that that experience. And yeah, we have this unbelievable chelation technology that is like second to none. And what we're talking about is all based down to the product, the ingredients and what goes in here and how they're prepared and how they're stored. And yeah, you could look at this label and you could see, oh, like, this is very similar to this product and this product, but it's so much deeper in that. Like, I wish we could actually have maybe we need to get a QR code on there to explain the technology in regards to why it's different, but it certainly is. And yeah, the science is there that absolutely proves it. And you've written a book about the product, not exclusively about the product, but you have chapters in your book about it. We've got this book here, The Better Brain by Dr. Bonnie Kaplan and Julia Rutledge, a phenomenal book. And these 2 phenomenal researchers, they've been on our podcast before and they've been on yours, and they are literally doing, especially Julia Rutledge right now, that she's doing continued research on these products for PTSD, depression, anxiety, all these things across the spectrum of mental health disorders. And the research is coming out more and more all the time. So it's clear cut. These products are incredibly effective. And I was going to ask you, like, would you recommend these products for somebody who doesn't have like necessarily bipolar disorder, which is like on this far end of the spectrum of significant psychological disorders? Would you recommend it for somebody who's like just dealing with mild stress or even anxiety or depression?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. My kids all take it. My husband takes a small dose of it. He's unfortunately on a medication right now that he can't take a full dose, but he believed in it once he saw the effect that it had on me and my kids. So my son was diagnosed with ADHD and I did not want to medicate him. And I found out that this worked for, helping with ADHD. And it's really fascinating because he's a senior in high school now. And I've had a number of parents come to me when they found out that he wasn't medicated. He has ADHD, but he's totally high functioning. He has no issues in school. And I have a daughter my two daughters both take it. They've never been diagnosed with anything, but I started them on it pretty early because I thought it's vitamins. It's like eating. This isn't a medication. I think that's one of the things that I kind of started to talk about earlier. I believed when I first was taking these that this was replacing my medication, that medication didn't work for me, so I'm going to try micronutrients.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing. Micronutrients are something your body is designed, it needs. It's in our food. The problem is that, number one, most of us are not getting adequate nutrition in the first place. Our food supply is severely depleted in micronutrients. The soil's depleted. Most of our food is coming from long ways away. And so the travel time and that depletes the nutrition in the food. In addition to that, if you read Dr. Ruckledge and Kaplan's book, they talk about how they're starting to recognize that there are genetic predispositions to requiring higher levels of micronutrient support.
Mm-hmm.
And so our bodies just aren't getting adequate nutrition. Our brains are not getting adequate nutrition. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we're seeing this dramatic increase in the number of people who are being diagnosed with anxiety and depression. And, all of these disorders are oftentimes one of the root sources of these symptoms are a micronutrient insufficiency. We need more support for our brains. They're just not getting what they need to function in a healthy way.
Yeah. And if you were to look at the amount of drugs that come out onto the market for ADHD, for depression, for anxiety, for bipolar schizophrenia, and you see the rates of these disorders going up, like they're clearly not helping. And if you can just take a step back and have a look at like what the drug model, especially here in Canada, is all about, and what Health Canada is kind of all about, these drugs are put on the market to make money. They're produced by pharmaceutical companies that have a judiciary responsibility towards their shareholders to make money. And Health Canada, for example, they consider these pharmaceutical companies to be their clients, to be their customer, because 2/3 of their income comes from pharmaceutical companies, and they don't have on any of their agendas the health of Canadians is like their number one priority, because if they would, the research would tell them they should be on micronutrient formulas way before they would be trying something so harsh and severe, and in some cases poorly tested drugs.
Yeah. Well, and it's, again, these chemicals are foreign to our body.
Mm-hmm.
These medications are not natural to our bodies. They're not natural to the brain. They are not normalizing brain function. They are abnormalizing it. And so it's so critical to understand what's actually happening in your brain when you experience these symptoms. And when we add the micronutrients back in, when you give your brain what it actually needs, it levels everything back out. It makes it so that it is possible for your brain to function in a healthy way. And that was critical on my healing journey. Once I got the medication out of the way and I gave my brain the support it needed to function in a healthy way, then I could work on the other things that I was struggling with, the other emotional issues and trauma and that. But it wasn't possible until I got the medication out of my system and the micronutrients into my brain.
Yeah, your body, your biology is phenomenal. It knows what it needs. And when you couple that with just looking at the world through nature and what your body, what we've been given in regards to food and plants, etc., like it's very, very basic and very simple once you can get to know it. But yeah, we're living in a confusing world. Would you mind recommending a few maybe like key books, podcasts, or resources that you may recommend for people who are looking to learn to manage their bipolar disorder in, let's say, an unconventional but more empowering way?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you to read my book first, because and the way that I designed my book is as a self-help book.
Mm-hmm.
The first 4 chapters tell my story. I think you need to know where I'm coming from, need to understand where I came from, so that you know why I wrote this book in the first place.
Yeah.
But then the next 7 chapters are steps. I teach you the tools that I utilize to go through the healing process, and and in a way that makes it accessible for other people, helps you to see how those tools might be able to be helpful to you. And then I would highly recommend the Anatomy of an Epidemic by Robert Whitaker. That was my red pill moment. As I gradually went through the healing process, I didn't know I was healing when I was healing. I thought I was learning how to manage my disorder better because I still believed, all the way up until probably about 2020, that I had bipolar and I would have it for the rest of my life, but I had just learned how to manage it better. And when I read his book, was when I realized I'd been lied to. It was when I started to understand the entire paradigm of the system was flawed. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we have in this system, is that everything is based on this idea that these are medical conditions that are being diagnosed. And so the entire paradigm is based on that idea that they're medical conditions that require medication. And so all the studies that back up everything are being done based on that belief.
Mm-hmm.
And once you pull back the curtain and understand the flaw, the system itself is flawed, then you can start to take more responsibility for yourself. You can start to have more, courage to make the choices that are going to help you find healing for yourself, rather than continuing to suffer under this delusion of the disease mindset model. I highly recommend Dr. Moncrief's book, A Straight Talking Introduction to Psychiatric Drugs, The Truth About How They Work and How to Come Off Them. That was really informative. It helps you understand how the drugs work in your system. It helps you understand withdrawal better, because you understand what the changes have been made, what changes are made by these drugs and what's going to happen when you come off of them. And then each of the chapters in my book there are books that I've read that bear out the research for each of the tools. And so each of the chapters in my book there's resources at the back of the book that you can go to that tell you each of the chapters what books I utilized in my own research. And so if somebody wants to do deep dive, they can go in and read each of those books themselves and learn for themselves about the efficacy of each of the tools.
Amazing. It sounds like the perfect guide for somebody who really wanted to make that shift. And the more we can get that out to people, I think it's just incredibly inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing that. That's great. Some really great
Absolutely.
tools. Yeah, I'll make sure they're linked in so people can very easily navigate towards those books and those resources. But that's kind of it. That was amazing. An hour and a half, and that's just gone by so fast. And I missed out a bunch of questions I wanted to ask you. So maybe we'll have a little part 2 to this. But we mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to be doing a giveaway for your book, as well as a bottle of EMPower Plus and a bottle of Free Minnows, all packed together. So you can head over to our Instagram page, which is at Truehope Canada. And I'll put a link in the description for that as well. And there'll be very simple, easy giveaway instructions there to connect with myself at Truehope and connect with Michelle as well. So head over to that for that. But other than that, Michelle, do you want to just let people know where they can connect with you as the best place for them to learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. My website and all of my social media handles are The Upside of Bipolar. So my website is theupsideofbipolar.com. And on social media, you can find me at The Upside of Bipolar. And I love to hear from people. I love to interact with people. So I'd love for people to reach out to me.
Perfect. Well, I'm sure they're going to do that. And again, I'm going to make sure all those links are easily available in the show notes for people to do that. But Michelle, I've been so pumped about this all week to be able to do the show with you. We're going to get this out real soon. Thank you so much again for coming on the show and sharing about your history, your story. And it's super interesting because it resonates so much with the birth of Truehope, born out of absolute tragedy. And now it's this incredible triumph that is, bringing a lot of joy to the world. And my gosh, do we need that?
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Awesome, Michelle. Well, thank you so much again. Well, that's it, everybody. Thank you so much for watching, for listening. You can leave us a little review on iTunes and a star review on Spotify if you feel like doing that. Again, everything you might need in regards to reference to things we've been talking about, I'll leave in the show notes for you. Don't forget to check out that giveaway. It's going to be dynamite. Other than that, we'll see you next week, everyone. Thank you.